this morning, just want to just kind of talk about, we're going to be in Mark chapter 5. You ever been interrupted in your life? You ever had an interruption? When we were out in Bluffton, Indiana, we were siding our house. I like to do projects. I'm a hands-on type of guy, and we bought an old house to fix up, and we fixed up the whole house. And I was learning how to side. I figured it can't be too hard, and I got all the siding, got all the materials, and I took a week of vacation to get the siding done that one summer. And I was like, this is going to be perfect. The weather said it was going to be great, and there's no problems at all. I said, okay, Monday morning we are going to start siding our house, and we'll get it done 2 or 3 days tops. And no problem, we'll have spare time. Anytime you do a construction project, you should also just figure out that it's always going to take twice as long and cost twice as much. But we went to side, and that Sunday evening, I started getting a pain. And I woke up in the morning screaming. I had a kidney stone. Never had a kidney stone in my life, but if you've ever had one, oh man. Yes. I went to the hospital emergency room. I said, I don't care what you do, kill me, whatever, just help me. They helped me. They said, you got a kidney stone. You're going to have to take it easy for a while. I don't have a while. I got to get going. I got to side my house. They said, you got to take it easy a while. And I was like, oh no, plans changed. So the first few days I had a kidney stone, it got lodged, and I was miserable for 2 or 3 days. Went back into the emergency room saying, this isn't working. Ended up having to have a procedure. And by the time that was done, pretty much my entire week that I was going to side my house was gone. I said, this isn't good. Well, I'm going to have to take next week off to side my house. So I'm taking more vacation time. And while I'm taking vacation time, this kidney stone hadn't passed yet. So I decided, well, you know what? I'm okay. I'm going to go ahead and start siding my house in pain and on pain medicine. So I start siding my house and get half of it done. While I'm siding my house, another interruption comes. My best friend comes over, says, hey, we're in town. Can we come spend the night? Or can we come hang out? Sure, bring a hammer. Right? He comes, brings a hammer, and while we're doing that, friends are visiting, we're trying to side the house. All of a sudden, this storm comes through that's not supposed to happen, but guess what? It does. And it rains in this 3-day project. Because actually what happened is I got the siding done, and then we stand back and look, and the first part that I started doing while I had a kidney stone was crooked. And I said, it's okay. Stacy's like, no. So we had to take half our house down and put it back up. But the 3-day project ended up being almost 2 weeks, wasn't it? 2 weeks, maybe longer, because of interruptions. Right? I mean, life is just full of interruptions. Last week I was trying to run to Walmart. Well, it would have been 2 weeks ago now. I was trying to make a quick run to Walmart. Just had to pick one thing up. Going to Walmart, I get a phone call. Someone in the church, they need prayer. So I pray with them. And then I got to call the prayer chain. I put it on the prayer chain. I make it to Walmart. As I'm going in, and we're in a small town kind of like this. Everyone knows each other, right? I walk into Walmart. I see 5 people from my church and a couple people from the funeral home that I got to talk to. As I'm leaving, I start getting a text, and it's not good to text and drive, so I got to pull over and answer all these texts. And then I get another person say, hey, can you come over here real quick? I need some help. So my 10-second Walmart trip was the entire day. I finally get a call from Stacy, and she's like, where are you? It's supposed to be quick Walmart. I'm like, well, interruptions. You know what? This was Jesus' life. If you ever read through the book of Mark, man, it is amazing. But every time Jesus turns around, he is interrupted. Something is stopping him from doing where he is going or what he is supposed to be doing. Another interruption over and over and over again. In fact, if you read through, Jesus will be standing there teaching, and then all of a sudden he's interrupted because there's a man with a crippled hand. And they're waiting to see what he's going to do with the crippled hand. He's interrupted with just a man with a crippled hand. He's teaching with 5,000 people plus. He's teaching, and all of a sudden they're like, wait a minute, we're kind of hungry. We can't go home, we're hungry. And all of a sudden now he has to feed over 5,000 people. Interruption after interruption. He's walking around and all of a sudden there's this lady thrown in front of him. Hey, we caught her in adultery. What are you going to do? Interruption. As I was reading through Mark chapter 5, I read this passage and I just said, wow, here's another interruption in Jesus' life. Another interruption. In fact, this usually is preached when people teach on this, or every time I've heard, a lot of times when I've heard it teach, it's usually told as two different stories, two different passages, but really it's all one event that kind of runs in together. And it's about a guy with a 12-year-old daughter who is sick. And then a lady who has been sick for 12 years. And they interrupt Jesus' life. So we're in Mark chapter 5, verse 21. The background is Mark is just this hurry-up book. Mark is a book, if you ever read it, it goes instantly. Jesus does this instantly. That's why I like it. I have ADD. And so he just jumps around and goes like that. It's a great book to read through. Jesus just calmed the storm on the sea. He just healed a man that was demon-possessed, and the demons jumped into pigs, and the pigs jumped off a cliff, and that made everyone mad because they lost a lot of bacon. And that would make anybody mad. So they kick him out of the town. And it says immediately Jesus got in a boat and he goes to the other side. And that's where we're at. Verse 21, and I apologize when I told Pastor John to put the NIV up there, and I think that it's going to be up there. And I grabbed my NLT Bible, so it might be different. I apologize, but we'll just go with it, right? When Jesus got into the boat again, he went back to the other side of the lake, where a large crowd gathered around him on the shore. And it seems like anywhere Jesus went, there was a large crowd. They just kept gathering. He couldn't get alone. Every time he crossed over, another large crowd. The crowd gathered on the shore. There was then a leader of the local synagogue, whose name was Jairus, arrived. When he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet, pleading fervently with him. He said, "My little daughter is dying." He said, "Please come and lay your hands on her. Heal her so she can live." And right away, there's a crowd, and right away as he's walking, an interruption. Right away, this man says, "Oh, listen, please." And he drops down in front of Jesus on his knees and says, "Please help me. My daughter is sick. My daughter is dying." Now, the local synagogue leader, he was a really important man in that town. He was probably one of the most important people in that city. He was in charge of taking care of the synagogue. He was in charge of maintaining the building. He was in charge of teaching the families and organizing the prayer service every week. Sometimes he would even teach the little kids and taught in the synagogue schools. And here he is, he's interrupted. Jesus is walking, he says, "Please heal me." And what does Jesus do anytime he's interrupted with someone? He usually helps them. So he goes on. Jesus went with him, and all the people followed, crowding around him. Then a woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding. She had suffered a great deal from many doctors. And over the years, she had spent everything she had to pay them, but she had gotten no better. In fact, she had gotten worse. She had heard about Jesus, so she came up behind him through the crowd and touched his robe. For she thought to herself, if I can just touch his robe, I will be healed. Again, he's interrupted. I mean, this is actually an interruption inside an interruption. This is one of those multi-layer interruptions where Jesus is walking around. He's going to help Jairus, and then all of a sudden someone tugs on the back of his robe. Someone touches him to be healed. This lady just had faith that she could just be healed. She said, if I can just touch his robe, I will be healed. And so she interrupts Jesus again. Immediately the bleeding stopped, and she could feel in her body that she had been healed of her terrible condition. I love this part. Jesus realized at once the healing power had gone out from him. So he turned around in the crowd and asked, who touched my robe? Who touched my clothes? Now, if you can picture this with me, Jesus is in the middle of what? A large crowd. In fact, before that, it said they were all crowding around him. So who's touching him? Everyone is touching him. He's getting bumped. I don't know if you ever tried if you went to like a professional football game, or if you ever, went to the Bengals is down here, right? If you ever went to Cincinnati game, in the crowd, at halftime, everyone's rushing to get, a drink or nachos or whatever, and it is like, you are bumping into each other, you're running into each other, there's nowhere to go. This is what Jesus is doing right now. He's walking through this crowd, they're bumping into each other, and all of a sudden he stops and he says, "Who touched me?" And his disciples' response was this. His disciples said to him, look around, look at this crowd pressing around you. How can you say, "Who touched me?" Translation is, what do you mean, Jesus? Everyone is touching you. Look, everyone is touching you. How can you say that? In fact, I can see Peter going, "I'm not touching you. I don't know if your kids do that. But when we say hands to yourself, what do? Okay, and they get as close as they can to touching the other one's face. "I'm not touching you." I'm sure it was probably Peter that did that. And they're going, "Of course, look, Jesus, everyone is touching you. How can you say that?" But Jesus knew something had happened, but he kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the frightened woman, trembling at the realization of what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet and told him what she had done. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering is over." Put your finger right there on that verse, because I'm going to come back to this. While he was still speaking to her, catch this, there's already been one interruption. There's been another interruption. Now guess what? As he is talking to her, while he is saying, he's probably making this amazing point, it's as if he's in the middle of a sermon. And he's saying, "Your faith has made you," and as he is speaking, someone comes up and interrupts again. This past week, I was speaking at a children's camp. I do optical illusions with children and magic tricks and all that kind. It's really fun and get to share the gospel through it. And I was speaking at a camp in South Carolina. And I was doing one of my optical illusions, and it's a fun one where it's a rope that stands out straight. And I play with the kids and act like it doesn't work, but it does. And they're all screaming and going crazy, and we're having a blast. And usually what happens, 99 out of 100 times, actually all the time, it's never happened before, but usually what happens while I'm doing it, the kids stay in their seat and just go, "It's working," and I'm like, it's not working, because every time I turn around, it would stop working. Well, at camp this week, as I'm saying, as I'm holding the rope out, saying, "It's not working," I have this little girl, as I'm talking, run up on stage. She's about this little big, and she goes, "Pastor Drew, you're not listening to me." She's looking up. I'm like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "It's working. You just look away." And she explains the whole thing to me. Like I had no idea what was going on. I'm like, I'm kind of in the middle of a routine here, but okay. That's what Jesus, he was in the middle of it. He was like right there in the middle of his point. "Your faith has made you well." And then all of a sudden, while he was still speaking, messengers arrived from the home of Jairus, the leader of the synagogue. And they told him, "Your daughter is dead." They said, "Why bother the teacher anymore? Don't worry about it. It's too late. Too many interruptions." Jesus, if you would have just kept walking and not worried about who touched you, maybe something better could have happened. But don't bug him anymore. It's not worth it. Jesus overheard them, and he said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid. Just believe." Another translation says, "Don't be afraid. Just have faith." That word "believe" is the same Greek word earlier in verse 34. Just have faith. Then Jesus stopped the crowd and wouldn't let anyone go with him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw much commotion, weeping and wailing. He went inside and asked, "Why all this commotion and weeping? The child isn't dead, she's only asleep." Another time, the crowd laughed at him. They knew what dead looked like. The crowd laughed at him, but he made them all leave, and he took the girl's father and mother and his 3 disciples into the room where the girl was lying. Holding her hand, he said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, get up." The little girl, who was 12 years old, immediately stood up and walked around, and they were overwhelmed and totally amazed. Jesus gave them strict orders not to tell anyone what had happened. He told them to give her something to eat. As I finish this, as I read through this passage, and I look at all of these interruptions in life, and I'm like, yes, I understand. It is a pain to be interrupted. I all of a sudden realize that, this passage isn't about interruptions that I thought it was. This passage isn't about what to do with interruptions in our life. This passage is actually about faith. You still have your fingers where I told you to put your fingers? Verse 34, "And daughter, your faith has made you well." Verse 36, "Don't be afraid, just have faith." This passage is all about faith. And the contrast of two characters that are completely opposite in what this teaches us about faith. So for the rest of the morning, I just want to spend a few minutes just looking at this and figuring out what we can learn about faith through this passage. First thing I think we can figure out is that, you know what? When it comes to faith, it's not about who you are. When it comes to faith, it's not about who you are. My wife is an amazing, sweet lady. Hopefully you'll get the chance to get to know her a little bit, but she is quiet. She doesn't talk much. She hates to be up front. Wonderful. I got an older sister named Angie. She lives in Columbus, Ohio. She actually speaks at camps with me when we go to speak at camp, and Angie is completely opposite. Okay? Angie is loud, obnoxious. I can say that because she's my sister. She doesn't stop talking. She is just a bubbly, non-stop, just more energy than ever. My sister and Stacy were roommates in college. Talk about complete opposites. There wasn't anything that they were like. My sister likes it sub-0 degrees. Stacy likes it 110 degrees. It was like a pair made not to be a pair. But they were roommates in college, got along great, but you could not find two more opposite people. Look at these two people in Scripture. I don't think you can find two more opposite people. Completely contrast. Jairus is a synagogue leader. He's important. He is a man of God. He worked for God. He was married. He had a family. He had a 12-year-old daughter. He was important. He was wealthy. He had a lot of money. He had a good life. Everything was going well for him. He was on top of the mountain. He was on top of the world. Everyone respected him. Then his daughter, his blessing of 12 years, became sick. Now contrast that with the woman. The woman, someone in the crowd. In fact, you want to know this? Look, we don't even know her name. We know Jairus. Jairus is important. Everyone knew his name. This woman, just a lady in the crowd. We don't know her name. She was poor. She thought the money that she had could make her better, so she spent it all on doctors and other things, and guess what? It made her worse. She didn't have any money. She was sick. She had been sick for 12 years. She had been suffering for 12 years. In fact, this sickness that she had and the tradition that they were in made her unclean, which means she did not have a husband, which means she did not have a family, which means she was an outcast. She was not allowed physically to touch anyone, which if you think about it, she did touch someone. She was an outcast. In fact, you know what? We have Jairus, he's the leader of the synagogue. This lady wasn't even allowed to go to the synagogue. She hadn't been to church for 12 years. My roommate in college was an art major. He's an art professor now. And he always said, you know what? You want to know how to tell good art? Contrast. Contrast is good art. If you can look at something and the highest point of contrast will bring your eyes to that point. This is contrast. These two people. They both came to Jesus. And here's the beautiful thing. When it comes to faith, it's not who you are that matters, because Jesus healed both of them. He didn't look at Jairus and say, wow, you are so important, you're so amazing, I'm going to help you, but oh man, you're sick, you're gross, you don't even have a name, I'm not going to help you. He didn't care. He didn't care if you were important or not important. He didn't care if you had money or didn't have money. He didn't care who you are. When it comes to faith, it's not who you are that matters. And that's good news for all of us. Because no matter who we are, when we come to him in faith, he doesn't judge the outside. He looks at the heart. When it comes to faith, that's not who you are. When it comes to faith, it's not what you do or how you do it. You ever known someone that, or ever known something that there's one way to do it and one way only to do it? My grandpa had this amazing saying. It was something like this. It was, there's more than one way to skin a... That's right. More than one way to skin a cat, which I think, who's skinning cats? That's horrible. And how do you know there's more than one way? That's even worse. These two people approached Jesus two totally different ways. Jairus approached Jesus with respect and honor. He came up in front of him. He approached him. He knelt down and, Master, teacher, please help me. The woman snuck up from behind. She knew she just wanted to touch his clothes. She didn't even want Jesus' attention. She just wanted to try to sneak up and touch him. She just touched the robe. She didn't want to make a scene. In fact, she knew that when she touched Jesus' clothes, if anybody found out, that because she touched him, it would make him considered unclean, according to tradition. She hid in the crowd. She tried to stay hidden until Jesus pointed her out. I've heard people say that we need to approach Jesus like Jairus, with the respect and the faith like that. I've heard others say we just need to approach like the woman, where we just stay in the crowd. We don't need to bring any attention to ourselves. And I say yes. Either way. Because when it comes to faith, it's not how you do it. It's not how you approach him. There's so many ways to come to Jesus in faith. When I was little, when I was 5 years old, I put my faith in Jesus, and I did it on the side of my bed with my dad leading me to Christ. I've stood up and preached to hundreds and hundreds of children, and had hundreds come to an altar and kneel down and accept Christ as their Savior. I've seen some crying in a corner to come to faith. I've heard stories of people just walking and having all of a sudden, wait a minute, I need Jesus, and coming to faith like that. I've seen people addicted to drugs at the bottom of the bottom, on the side of a road, come to faith. It's not how you do it. Because you know what? You can't buy your way, you can't dance your way, you can't preach your way. When it comes to faith, it's not who you are, it's not how you do it, and it's not what you need. Look, these two people needed two totally different things. They were both in need of physical healing, but they were different. Jairus came on behalf of someone. Jairus didn't want healing for himself. He wanted healing for his 12-year-old daughter, who eventually died. The lady had a 12-year-old disease. She couldn't get better. She kept getting worse, and she came on behalf of herself. When it comes to faith, it's not what you need. There's so many of us in here, we need different things that faith can meet. In Michigan, Stacy and I, we were up in Michigan, and we had this old car. In fact, that's all I ever end up owning is an old car. We had this old car, and it was Stacy's car, and she was driving it around. But this old car had this wonderful habit of just dying in the middle of driving. It had to be an electrical short somewhere. I could never find it. I tried to trace it, couldn't find it. But she would just be driving, all of a sudden it'd go, didn't matter where she was. It didn't care. In fact, it usually tried to pick the most inopportune times to die. Sunday morning, as I am standing up, I was playing bass on our worship team. And as we are standing up starting worship, I get a congregational member come up to me and go, "Hey, your wife is stuck in the middle of one of the busiest intersections of Sault Ste. Marie. She needs your help." And I'm going, we're in the middle of a song. Okay. So go get her, please, help someone. After church that day, we went to Pizza Hut to eat lunch. We were just frustrated, and we're like, Stacy said, "You know what? I'm not driving this car anymore. I can't do it." I said, "Well, we have a need. Let's pray for that. Let's pray for it. Let's pray about it." So before our pizza, we just pray. We say, "God, either make this car last a lot longer or give us another one because we can't afford anything." No joke. My phone rings, I pick it up, and it's someone from the church says, "You know what? We have this extra car, and we feel like God is telling us to give it to you." And I say, "Put extra toppings on the pizza." That's right. We have so many needs. It doesn't matter if it's a need of a car or a job or someone's sick. Salvation, food, money, comfort, intervention, healing. I mean, there's all this, but listen, there's nothing God can't handle. I mean, death couldn't even stop him. So it doesn't matter what you need. So what is it? When it comes to faith, what is it? What did they have in common? It's such a simple concept that so many times we lose sight of. When it comes to faith, it's who you have faith in. They both had faith in Jesus. They both knew who to go to with their problems and their troubles, with their sickness. Jesus. And as they came to Jesus, he looked at him and said, "It is your faith that made you well. Just have faith." They put their faith in the right person. When it comes to faith, it's who you have faith in that matters, and that's it. That's it. See, here's our problem, though, is we tend to put our faith in so many different things that don't matter. We try to put our faith in ourselves and say, I can do it. I've got this. Jesus, you can stay in the back seat right now. I've got this. Or we put our faith in money or others or loved ones, and we say, it's okay. And you know what? All these things will fail us. Just look at the woman who tried to put her money in her faith in her money. Spent it all, and it said, you know what? She got worse. Jesus is the one we need to put our faith in. He doesn't care who you are. He doesn't care how you approach him or what the problem is. He cares about whether your faith is in him or something else. I think this morning we're going to end with a song. And as we sing, just ask yourself, is my faith really in Jesus? Who is my faith in? Am I trying to impress God maybe with who I am or what I'm doing? Or do I think my need is too big, too small? It's not. Just remember, it's who you have faith in. Let's pray. God, I thank you that we can come here this morning and worship you. Lord, I thank you that we can have faith in your Son. And Lord, I pray that we will put our faith in you, Lord. It's such a simple concept. It's such a basic message that you give us. But it's something that we need to know, something that we need to remember all the time, that it is you and nothing else that deserves our faith. And I pray that we will trust you and we will put our faith in you this morning. We pray this in the name of Jesus.